The polished oak of the shooting range fell into perfect silence. Charles Markham's smirk froze on his face as the impossible happened. The janitor, the woman who cleaned their bathrooms and emptied their trash, had just hit a perfect bullseye. Not just any bullseye. The kind professionals train years to achieve. And she made it look effortless. "Beginner's luck," someone whispered, but their voice lacked conviction. Then Brenda Johnson, her gray uniform still bearing faint cleaning solution stains, fired again. And again. And again. Each shot piercing the center with mathematical precision. The wealthy members of the Oak Ridge Shooting Club exchanged glances of disbelief as their mockery turned to stunned silence. How could they have been so blind? How could everyone have missed what had been right in front of them all along? But to understand the power of this moment, this perfect suspended moment of revelation, we need to go back. Back to where Brenda Johnson became invisible, and how she finally found the courage to be seen again. Have you ever felt like you were hiding your true talents from the world? Like there was a part of yourself too painful or frightening to share? If so, perhaps Brenda's story will speak to your soul. 6 months earlier, if you had visited the Oak Ridge Community Center, you might not have noticed Brenda at all. That was by design. At 42, she had mastered the art of invisibility. Her movements were economical, her gray uniform intentionally forgettable. Her eyes always downcast when members passed by. She pushed her cleaning cart with just enough pressure to avoid squeaking, one more small effort to remain unheard and unseen. The community center housed a modest gym, meeting rooms, a cafeteria, and in the East Wing, a surprisingly professional shooting range, the pride of the small town of Oak Ridge. It was this last facility that Brenda studiously avoided, though anyone watching closely might have noticed how her cleaning routes always seemed to bring her near its doors just as they opened or closed, allowing the distinct pop of gunfire to escape into the hallway. Sometimes, when alone, her hands would pause on her mop or duster, growing perfectly still at the sound. Her breathing would change, becoming measured and rhythmic. Then, catching herself, she would force her hands back into motion, often working with redoubled energy, as if outrunning something only she could see. What no one at Oak Ridge knew was that the woman who scrubbed their toilets and polished their trophies had once been Staff Sergeant Brenda Johnson, decorated markswoman with 12 years of military service and a reputation for having the steadiest hands in her unit. The woman they barely looked at had once been someone soldiers specifically requested when precision was a matter of life or death. But that was before the mission that changed everything. Before the hesitation that cost lives. Before Brenda Johnson decided she was no longer worthy of her gift. At the community center, Brenda's days fell into a carefully maintained routine. She arrived early before most staff, and stayed late after most had gone. She took her breaks alone in the maintenance closet, seated on an overturned bucket with a worn paperback. The center's director, Mrs. Levinson, had tried making conversation during Brenda's first months, but eventually respected her clear preference for solitude. What people didn't see was Brenda's quiet attentiveness. How she memorized which children forgot their lunch money and discreetly covered the difference. How she repaired the broken basketball return mechanism after hours so the kids wouldn't miss a day of practice. How she noticed everything while being noticed by almost no one. Almost no one. The Oak Ridge Shooting Club met every Thursday and Saturday at the community center's range. Led by Charles Markham, the group was less about improving marksmanship than it was about social positioning. Charles had ensured membership remained exclusive, application by invitation only, annual dues steep enough to discourage the working class from applying. At 45, Charles cut an impressive figure. His custom shooting jacket bore the embroidered crest of the club he'd founded. His equipment case, hand-tooled Italian leather, contained a collection of firearms whose combined value exceeded what most Oak Ridge residents earned in a year. When he entered a room, his voice projected just slightly louder than necessary, a habit born from a lifetime of ensuring he was heard. "Thomas, good to see you," Charles announced, clapping the shoulder of a newer member. "I see you've upgraded to the German scope." "Excellent choice. I told my broker about that company 6 months ago. Stock's up 30% already." Charles's girlfriend Eliza Winters stood nearby. Her own equipment no less impressive. At 38, she was still striking, with the poised confidence of someone accustomed to being admired. As the club's shooting instructor, she guided new members through the basics, though her coaching suspiciously emphasized the strengths of those with social capital while glossing over their weaknesses. As members filed toward the range, Brenda quietly entered from a side door, beginning to empty trash bins while keeping her back to the group. Charles's voice carried across the room. "Johnson. The men's restroom needs attention. Paper towels are empty. No please. No thank you." Not even the courtesy of her first name. "Yes, Mr. Markham," Brenda replied softly, eyes down. "Right away." As she turned to leave, Charles continued speaking to his companions, not bothering to lower his voice. "You know, I suggested to the board we outsource the cleaning staff. These community employees simply lack proper standards." Laughter rippled through the group as Brenda disappeared into the hallway, her face betraying nothing. What Charles and his friends didn't know was that their community center was in financial trouble. Mrs. Levinson had spent weeks reviewing budget reports with increasingly furrowed brows. Grant funding had decreased, and operational costs had risen. Without a significant influx of funds, programs would need to be cut, most likely the after-school activities that served families who couldn't afford childcare. The potential salvation appeared in the form of an announcement. The Tri-County Marksmanship Championship would be held in 3 months. The host facility would receive substantial sponsorship money, and the winning team would earn a $50,000 prize, enough to keep the center's programs running through the year. Mrs. Levinson had immediately submitted Oak Ridge as a potential host, and to everyone's surprise, the community center had been selected. The central location and unexpectedly professional range facilities had tipped the decision in their favor. Charles Markham wasted no time positioning himself as the natural choice to lead the Oak Ridge team. "The competition committee was clearly impressed by our club's reputation," he announced during the next meeting. "I've already spoken with several potential sponsors about equipment donations. With my connections, we're practically guaranteed to host again next year if this goes well." "What about the actual competition?" asked Samuel Reeves, a newer member who had yet to fully embrace the club's social dynamics. At 26, Sam was notably younger than most members, having joined primarily for the facilities rather than the networking. Charles's smile tightened slightly. "The trophy is practically assured, Samuel. Between myself, Eliza, and Thomas, we have 3 expert marksmen. We'll select 2 more from the club's top shooters. The neighboring counties simply don't have our resources or talent pool." What Charles didn't say was that his confidence masked growing concern. He had competed in regional events before, but always in categories carefully selected to highlight his strengths. The Tri-County Championship would require versatility he wasn't certain he possessed, not that he would ever admit such doubts aloud. As the meeting concluded, members filed out. Brenda, who had been quietly cleaning windows in the adjacent hallway, stepped aside to let them pass. No one acknowledged her presence. No one except Sam, who nodded politely, meeting her eyes. "Evening, Ms. Johnson." Brenda seemed startled by the simple courtesy, managing only a small nod in return before turning back to her work. But as Sam walked away, he could have sworn he'd seen something in those downcast eyes. A fleeting assessment, as if she'd taken his measure in that brief moment of connection. It was the first time anyone had really looked at him since he'd joined the club. 8 years earlier, in a mountainous region thousands of miles from Oak Ridge, Staff Sergeant Brenda Johnson had lain perfectly still for nearly 6 hours. Her spotter, Corporal Miguel Diaz, maintained position beside her, occasionally murmuring wind conditions or distance adjustments. Their mission was to provide overwatch for a team extracting a high-value informant. "Team approaching checkpoint 3, came the whispered update through her comms. Brenda made a minute adjustment to her sight. The extraction had gone smoothly so far, almost too smoothly. Something felt wrong, though she couldn't articulate what exactly. Just a dissonance in the pattern of movements below, a rhythm that didn't match standard civilian activity. "Talk to me, Johnson," her commander's voice crackled in her ear. "You're quiet." "Something's off, sir," she replied softly. "Can't place it yet." Then she saw it. A subtle reflection from a window that shouldn't have caught light at that angle. Someone was watching from a position that had been cleared an hour earlier. "Possible hostel, northeast building, second floor, third window," she reported calmly. Through her scope, she could make out the silhouette of a man raising what appeared to be a communication device. "Confirmed hostel," came the response. "You are cleared to engage." Brenda exhaled slowly, her finger taking up the first pressure on the trigger. But in that critical moment something stopped her. The figure had shifted, and behind him, she caught glimpse of what looked like a child's form. "Wait," she whispered. "I see a possible civilian." "Johnson, our intel confirms no civilians in that building. Take the shot." "I need confirmation." "That's an order, Sergeant. Take the shot now." Her hesitation lasted less than 5 seconds. 5 seconds in which the figure completed his call. 5 seconds that allowed a hidden team to move into position. 5 seconds that resulted in 2 of her team members never coming home. The investigation cleared her of wrongdoing. The child had been a tactical deception, a doll positioned precisely to create doubt in any observer. Her commander acknowledged that she'd followed protocol by reporting the possible civilian presence. But the fact remained. Her hesitation had cost lives. The nightmares began shortly after. In them, she always took the shot immediately, and sometimes a real child fell. Other times she hesitated and watched her teammates die again and again. She would wake drenched in sweat, her hands shaking uncontrollably. Hands that had never trembled on a mission before. 3 months later, she requested a discharge. 4 months after that, she applied for the janitor position at Oak Ridge Community Center, giving a vague employment history that mentioned government service but no details. She chose the job specifically because no one would look closely at her there. No one would depend on her judgment or her hand's steadiness. No one would die if Brenda Johnson made a mistake cleaning floors. Months passed at the community center. As the championship drew closer, the shooting club's practice sessions intensified. Charles pushed for exclusive use of the range during prime hours, a request Mrs. Levinson reluctantly granted despite complaints from casual users who found themselves relegated to inconvenient times. Charles's team had been finalized. Himself, Eliza, Thomas, and 2 other club members. They practiced with expensive new equipment, Charles constantly reminding everyone within earshot about the sponsors he'd secured. What no one noticed was Brenda's cleaning schedule gradually shifting to bring her near the range during these practices. She never entered or watched directly, but from the adjoining supply room, she could hear enough. The rhythms of their shots told her stories their words never could. Charles fired too quickly, his impatience showing in the irregular timing between shots. Eliza consistently overcompensated for recoil, resulting in low left placement. Thomas flinched subtly just before firing, almost imperceptible, but enough to affect precision at competition distances. One evening, long after the center had closed, Sam returned for a glove he'd forgotten in the locker room. Passing by the maintenance area, he noticed light spilling from beneath the door. Curious, he approached quietly. Through the half-open door, he saw Brenda sitting at a workbench, meticulously adjusting the sight on a training rifle from the youth program. Her movements were precise, confident, nothing like her usual self-effacing manner. Most striking was her expression. Focused intensity had replaced her habitual blankness, transforming her features entirely. Sam must have made some small sound because Brenda's head snapped up, her hands instantly stilling. "Sorry," he said quickly. "Didn't mean to startle you. I just came back for something I forgot." Brenda carefully set down the rifle. "The sight was misaligned," she explained, her voice soft but steadier than he'd ever heard it. "The kids were getting frustrated because they couldn't hit targets. Wasn't their fault." Sam nodded, then asked, "How did you know it was the sight?" A moment of silence stretched between them. Something in her seemed to be calculating risk, weighing how much to reveal. Just experience, she finally said. Instead of leaving, Sam stepped into the room. Could you look at mine sometime? I think there's something off with my grip or stance. Been trying to correct it for weeks. The request hung in the air between them. Brenda's eyes, usually downcast, studied him directly for the first time. I'm not an instructor, she said carefully. I know. But you notice things. Another long pause. Then, bring your stance logs next Thursday. After closing. It was the beginning of a quiet alliance. Each Thursday after hours, Brenda would watch Sam's form, offering sparse but remarkably insightful adjustments. She never demonstrated herself, never touched a firearm, but her guidance transformed his accuracy within weeks. Where did you learn so much about this? Sam finally asked one evening. Brenda's answer was characteristically brief. Another life. She changed the subject, but something had shifted between them. A tentative trust had formed, the first real connection Brenda had allowed since arriving in Oak Ridge. 2 weeks before the championship, disaster struck the Oak Ridge team. During practice, Thomas injured his shoulder in a car accident, and another team member withdrew after a family emergency called him out of state. Charles was beside himself, calling emergency meetings to discuss replacements. We have 2 weeks, he ranted in Mrs. Levinson's office. 2 weeks to find and train replacements who can perform at competition level. Perhaps we could open trials to the community, Mrs. Levinson suggested. There might be hidden talent among regular range users. Charles's laugh was dismissive. This isn't a charity event, Marianne. We need professionals, not hobbyists. He paced the small office. At this point, even the janitor would be better than having empty slots. Mrs. Levinson's expression changed. Brenda, I was being facetious, Charles snapped. Actually, Mrs. Levinson said slowly, Sam Reeves mentioned something about Brenda having experience with firearms. Charles stared at her. You can't be serious. But the seed had been planted. That afternoon, Mrs. Levinson approached Brenda as she mopped the cafeteria floor. Brenda, I have an unusual request, she began gently. We're in a difficult situation with the championship team, and Sam suggested you might have some background with marksmanship. Brenda's mopping stopped. She stood perfectly still, eyes fixed on the floor. I don't shoot anymore, she said, her voice barely audible. Mrs. Levinson nodded. I understand. I wouldn't ask, but the center's programs depend on this competition. We don't expect you to win. We just need all positions filled to qualify. When Brenda remained silent, Mrs. Levinson continued softly. The after-school program might have to close without the championship money. 35 kids would have nowhere to go between school and when their parents finish work. Brenda resumed mopping, her movements mechanical. I'll think about it. The news that the cleaning woman might join the team spread quickly through the club. Charles and Eliza made no attempt to hide their amusement. Well, we'll certainly stand out now, Eliza laughed during their next practice. Perhaps she can bring her mop as a good luck charm. As long as she doesn't embarrass us completely, Charles added. Levinson put me in an impossible position. What was I supposed to say? That we're too good to shoot alongside the help. From the supply closet where she was organizing chemicals, Brenda heard every word. Her hands remained steady, though her heart raced at the thought of picking up a firearm again after 8 years. That night, for the first time since arriving in Oak Ridge, she opened the locked box kept beneath her bed. Inside lay her service medals and a single photograph of her unit. She traced the faces of the 2 men who hadn't returned from that fateful mission. What right did she have to touch a weapon again, after what her hesitation had cost? Yet children's programs would be cut without the championship money. Children like the ones she quietly helped each day, whose broken basketball hoop she'd repaired after hours, whose forgotten lunches she'd anonymously covered. The next morning, she found Mrs. Levinson before her shift began. I'll fill the spot, she said simply. But I make no promises about performance. What no one saw was Sam finding her that evening as she cleaned the range after hours. No one heard their conversation, or witnessed the moment when Brenda finally revealed fragments of her military past. And no one was there when Sam asked if she would actually shoot in the competition. "I don't know if I can," she answered with raw honesty. "But I know what will happen if I don't try." Would you have the courage to face your biggest fear in front of those who doubt you most? Would you risk failure and judgment when the stakes meant everything? Championship Day arrived with the community center transformed. Banners hung from every wall, vendors set up booths in the parking lot, and competitors from 3 counties filed in with equipment cases and nervous energy. Local news crews set up near the range entrance, interviewing participants about the significant prize money. Charles was in his element, introducing himself to officials and sponsors with practiced charm. His custom jacket had been augmented with the logos of businesses he'd convinced to back the Oak Ridge team. When reporters approached, he positioned himself as team spokesman, barely acknowledging his teammates. "We've trained extensively," he told a local reporter. "Our club members bring years of experience to this competition." "And is it true you have a last-minute addition to your team?" the reporter asked. "Someone from the center's staff?" Charles's smile tightened. "We believe in community inclusion. Our 5th member is filling an unexpected vacancy." As cameras turned away, his expression darkened. Where was Johnson anyway? Probably reconsidering her commitment, he thought. Part of him hoped she wouldn't show. But as the competition began, Brenda arrived quietly, wearing simple black pants and a gray shirt, the most formal outfit she owned. She carried no equipment case, having arranged to use one of the center's practice rifles. Next to the other competitors with their specialized gear, she looked painfully out of place. "There she is," Eliza whispered to Charles. "Should we at least pretend to give her pointers?" "Why bother?" Charles muttered back. "Let's just hope she hits the target paper and doesn't humiliate us completely." The competition proceeded through various categories and distances. Charles performed well, scoring consistently in the upper percentiles though not dominantly. Eliza and the other team members posted respectable scores. By midday, Oak Ridge stood in 3rd place among 12 teams, a position that would not win prize money but wouldn't embarrass them either. Then came the precision round, the category with the highest possible points. Charles completed his round with a solid score, nodding with satisfaction as he rejoined his team. "Unless Jefferson County's last shooter is superhuman, we should move into 2nd place," he announced. "Not the victory I'd hoped for, but respectable." The range official called the next shooter. Brenda Johnson, Oak Ridge Community Center. A murmur rippled through spectators familiar with the local teams. Who was this last-minute substitute no one had seen practice? Charles and Eliza exchanged glances as Brenda stepped forward. Charles made a show of covering his mouth to hide imaginary laughter, drawing snickers from nearby club members. All eyes watched as Brenda approached the firing line. For a terrible moment she froze completely. Her hands, those steady, capable hands, began to tremble visibly. The range fell silent as seconds stretched painfully. Charles's smirk grew more pronounced as he watched what he assumed was the beginning of a public meltdown. Then something extraordinary happened. Brenda closed her eyes briefly. When she opened them, a transformation passed over her entire being. Her breathing changed, becoming deep and rhythmic. Her posture shifted subtly, feet repositioning, shoulders squaring. When she lifted the borrowed rifle, her trembling hands had become preternaturally still. She assumed a stance no amateur could replicate, the position of someone who had spent thousands of hours in perfect alignment with their weapon. As she sighted down the range, the audience witnessed what competitive shooters call the zone, that rare state where human and tool become a single precision instrument. Her first shot broke the silence. Perfect center. The murmurs began immediately. "Lucky shot," some whispered. Her second shot grouped, touching the first. The whispering intensified. Her third shot completed a tight triangle in the bullseye's center, a grouping that professional shooters would envy. Charles's smile had vanished completely. By her fifth shot, the range had fallen into stunned silence. Competitors from other counties had stopped their own preparations to watch. Even the officials seemed mesmerized by the methodical precision they were witnessing. When Brenda completed her round, she'd scored the highest point total in the competition's history. As she lowered the rifle, her expression remained unchanged. No triumph, no smile, just the same quiet focus with which she'd begun. She turned from the line and met Charles's stunned gaze directly for the first time. The scoreboard confirmed what everyone had just witnessed. Oak Ridge had moved into first place, securing both the hosting rights for next year and the $50,000 prize. Not because of Charles or his expensive equipment or his social connections, but because of the janitor he'd mocked just hours earlier. As Brenda walked past him, Charles struggled to find words. Before he could speak, she said quietly, "Your left elbow drops just before you fire. That's why you pull shots at longer distances." Then she was gone, disappearing into the crowd while officials announced Oak Ridge's victory. In the days that followed, Brenda became reluctantly famous in Oak Ridge. Local papers ran the story of the janitor sharpshooter, who had stunned the competition. Mrs. Levinson received calls from reporters requesting interviews, all of which Brenda politely declined. "I don't want attention," she explained when Mrs. Levinson gently pressed her. "I just did what was needed for the center." But something had shifted within Brenda. The wall she'd built between her past skills and present life had cracked, allowing her to glimpse a different possibility, one where her gift could exist without the weight of tragedy attached to it. The transformation became apparent when, a week after the competition, she noticed a teenage girl struggling with anxiety during an open shooting session. The girl's father was pushing her to continue despite her obvious distress, creating a scene that drew uncomfortable attention. Without conscious decision, Brenda set aside her cleaning cart and approached. "Excuse me," she said softly to the frustrated father. "May I speak with her for a moment?" The man recognized Brenda from the newspaper coverage and stepped back in surprise. Brenda knelt beside the trembling girl. "What's your name?" she asked. "Emma," the girl whispered. "Emma, I used to get shaky before shooting too," Brenda said, her voice gentle but matter-of-fact. "Would you like to know what helped me?" For 15 minutes, Brenda talked quietly with Emma, showing her breathing techniques and mental focusing exercises. She never touched the girl's weapon or demonstrated directly. She didn't need to. Her calm guidance was enough to help Emma regain composure and complete her session successfully. What Brenda didn't realize was that Charles had witnessed the entire interaction from the observation area. He'd avoided the community center since the competition, his humiliation still raw. He'd come today specifically to practice alone, hoping to avoid seeing the woman who had so thoroughly exposed the hollowness of his expertise. Instead, he found himself watching as Brenda patiently guided the young shooter through her anxiety, using the exact instructional phrasing he valued but rarely shared with beginners. The genuine care in her approach was something his instruction had always lacked. For the first time, Charles felt something beyond embarrassment. He felt the weight of recognition that his identity had been built around being perceived as exceptional rather than actually helping others excel. Meanwhile, Mrs. Levinson approached Brenda with an unexpected proposal. Would she consider becoming a part-time shooting instructor for the center's youth program? The position would work around her janitorial schedule and substantially increase her income. Brenda's initial reaction was refusal. Teaching meant visibility. It meant responsibility. It meant trusting herself with others' development, something she'd denied herself since leaving the military. "I'm not qualified," she protested weakly. Mrs. Levinson smiled. "Your competition score and military background suggest otherwise. But more importantly, I saw how you helped that girl today. That kind of patience can't be taught." After days of consideration, Brenda accepted the position with one condition. She would continue her janitorial work as well. When Mrs. Levinson expressed confusion, Brenda simply said, "Both jobs matter." The community center flourished in the months that followed. With the prize money securing program funding and Brenda's new classes drawing unexpected interest, attendance increased significantly. Children from disadvantaged backgrounds particularly connected with the quiet instructor who treated them with unfailing respect. Charles's journey proved more difficult. His social circle fractured after the competition, with some friends distancing themselves while others expected him to join in diminishing Brenda's accomplishment. Neither path felt right anymore. For weeks, he avoided the center entirely, practicing at an expensive private range 30 miles away. But something drew him back eventually. Perhaps curiosity, perhaps a need for resolution. He arrived early one morning to find Brenda teaching a class that included both children from the after-school program and several former club members. Her quiet confidence had transformed from invisibility to assurance. When the class ended, Charles approached her as students filed out. Brenda tensed slightly but met his gaze steadily. For a moment he struggled with his pride. Then, instead of the apology she didn't need, he asked simply, "That breathing technique you were teaching, would you show me how it affects trigger control at extended distances?" The request acknowledged her expertise without fanfare, the most genuine respect he could offer. Brenda studied him briefly, then nodded once. Thursday evening. After closing. Later that evening, as Brenda cleaned up after her own class, a young student lingered behind. "Ms. Johnson," the girl asked hesitantly, "why do you still work as a janitor when you could be teaching full-time? My dad says you're the best shooter in 3 counties. Brenda continued wiping down the equipment methodically, considering her answer. "Some see 2 different jobs," she finally replied. "I see the same work, creating spaces where people can be their best selves." As she locked the range that night, Brenda caught her reflection in the glass door. No longer a woman hiding from her past, but someone who had found a way to honor both who she had been and who she was becoming. The trembling in her hands that had plagued her for years had finally stilled, not because she had forgotten her past, but because she had found a way to carry it forward with purpose. How might your hidden talents change lives if you found the courage to share them? What gifts are you keeping hidden that the world desperately needs? Like this video if Brenda's journey touched your heart. Share it with someone who might be hiding their own light. And subscribe to Jenny Soul Stories for more powerful tales of transformation that will inspire your soul. Until next time, remember that true courage isn't found in perfection, but in sharing your authentic self, scars, talents, and all. The most extraordinary people are often hidden in plain sight, just waiting for the courage to be seen.